right about there, we have a really odd jump in traffic. And as you can see, there is a strange amount of YouTube views that have been coming in the past 30 days from India. What up, fam? Atlantic Records has recently come under fire for allegedly botting views, likes, and comments on the most recent releases for Don Toliver, Roddy Ricch, and Lil Uzi. This has already been covered by other creators, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse by harping on what's already been covered. Instead, I want to dive deeper on these tracks and their artists to see what's going on under the hood and whether or not this was a one-time event, a habitual pattern, or intentional sabotage. This video will be the first in a 3-part deep dive series where we explore the validity of these statements and run audits on the artist's socials and streaming platforms to see if there's any other suspicious activity. At the end of this series, we will conclusively know if there was any artificial botting being generated and which of these artists are cap or fax. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you guys to please show some love to the channel and appease the algorithm gods by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing with your grandmother on Facebook and maybe even your uncle on Parler too. And without further ado, let's kick things off with Don Toliver. Our boy Donnie T dropped his new single Do It Right on November 16th and a music video on November 22nd, just 2 days before Thanksgiving, which was pretty odd timing to be dropping a music video. It's understood in the industry that releasing music around the holidays, especially Thanksgiving and Christmas, is usually a recipe for failure. Listener habits show that people aren't as likely to be listening to their preferred music due to spending time with family or in other social gatherings that don't involve dropping the latest bangers. Which begs the question, why did they choose to drop the video 2 days before Thanksgiving? Well, the obvious answer is so that we didn't catch them with their pants down, but somebody did. I'm not sure who the original person was who spotted the bot activity on this video, but it's pretty obvious by the bot comments alone that we're looking at some fraudulent activity. For starters, the engagement rate is wacky. We typically wouldn't see this many comments on a music video. You'd only see this much on videos that stir up debate and controversy. And even this is kind of looking extreme. And as others have already pointed out, the views jumped from 54,000 on day 1, which is respectable, to 7.1 million on day 2. And that's pretty suspicious. So let's take a look at the YouTube views and see where they're coming from. All right, so we're looking at Don Toliver's profile. This is pretty much all the data conglomerated onto one spot. If we look at his total audience right here, it kind of has everything divided up by Spotify, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. These are kind of the big ones, right? You don't have anything to compare it to, but I can tell you from looking at many a profile, this much of this graph right here being taken up by Spotify monthly listeners is insane. That is way disproportionate. There should be more of an even split, something more likely to see a 50-50 where 50% is the monthly listeners on Spotify, or even as low as, 30%, and then the rest is filled up with TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. But we'll come back to this because right now what we want to look at is over here. We want to look at the YouTube views and where they're coming from, right? So right here, this data and graph is all for Spotify monthly listeners, and we will come back to that, I promise, because you guys probably want to see it, but we're looking at the YouTube views. And as you can see, there is a strange amount of YouTube views that have been coming in the past 30 days from India. And in fact, if we get more of a breakdown on that, these are all the top cities that have been streaming his YouTube channel as of late. And we see almost like the exact same number between these two cities right here. India, through and through, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, before this kind of took off, that this video came out and then all the streams came through and everything, prior to all these India cities popping up, this was actually his #1 streaming city, Sao Paulo, Brazil. I want you to know that for now, because we're going to come back to that. But right now, let's focus on the standout ones, the odd ones, which are definitely India. India is obviously the cheapest place where you can get your YouTube views. You're looking at maybe 30 cents per 1,000 view. The reason that these views from India are so cheap is because the anti-fraud technology that YouTube has is a lot stronger in first world countries such as United Kingdom, America, Canada, but in countries like India and Iran, it's not going to focus nearly as much of its efforts on spotting fraudulent accounts and everything. And as we've seen from the comments as well, being very low quality, obviously fake and botted comments, we can safely assume that the likes are fake and botted as well. And what this tells us in the grand scheme of things is that when it came down to the marketing budget for our boy Donnie T for this specific YouTube video, they really tried to cut corners. Either they didn't have a large budget to work with to get the proper, more expensive bot activity from first world countries, making sure it was drip fed, or even run YouTube ads. They ended up having this type of result. And again, with such low quality comments, that also kind of supports that narrative as well. They were cutting corners and had a low budget to work with. So yeah, obviously there's some really suspicious stuff all coming from India. Let's go ahead and take a look at something else. So here we have the YouTube channel views, everything that's been coming into the whole channel. And as we can see right about there, we have a really odd jump in traffic, right? Change of 5.7 million views in one day, which breaks the norm of what looks like to be an average of 300 to 400,000 views per day. So this is a little outlier anomaly. This one right here would be an anomaly, but if you have watched my very first video on Smoke Perp, you'll know that when I explain this is actually a error in data reporting. And I don't want to get too in the weeds with that. So if you're confused about this and why we're not looking at this and seeing this as a red flag, go back and watch that video and I'll explain it in there with stupid AI voice text-to-speech shit. If we go over to the YouTube daily videos right over here, you'll see about the same. Boom, huge jump, huge spike, stuff that we're not really used to seeing. And that is the outlier of the spike in traffic. Definitely when all the India views came in. A deeper look into his YouTube platform. Here we have a demographic breakdown of his entire channel. We got less than 30% of his subscribers are from the United States, which is not a good look if your supposed audience's primary country is supposed to be the United States. The second most common one being from Brazil, which actually lines up with his #1 streaming city on YouTube being Sao Paulo. So that matches up, makes sense. Portuguese actually matches up as well because in Brazil that is their native language and the percentages match. So that's actually looking like a healthy stat there. The India one is obviously one we don't like to see, especially when you just botted essentially 7 million views at least from India. That's not to say all people in India are fake. In this case, all the views that came from there are fake in this regard. And also, we want to look at the average likes per video and the average comments per video. Going back to Don Toliver's actual video, if you remember, it's much different in that we have like over 100,000 likes on his newest video and 24,000 comments, nearly 25,000 comments. So that's an outlier right there. That doesn't even make sense, which points to fraudulent activity, allegedly. Looking at the YouTube views by country, no longer looking at it by city, you can see that the United States has the most, and almost to a T, we have India. And again, this is all data from the past 30 days. This is not showing all data ever. This is just past 30 days. Then we have Brazil following in second, which again kind of lines up with what I saw prior to all this things popping off. He must have a pop-in fan base in Brazil. I actually think that is legitimate. I will give him that. But YouTube aside, let's take a minute to look at the Spotify. So on the Spotify, it looks like we have majority are coming from the United States, followed by United Kingdom, Germany, India, Australia, Poland, Brazil. This is where we start to see a little bit of inconsistencies in some of the data matching. Let's break it down by city. We have London being its top streaming city right now, followed by Los Angeles, Chicago, then Sydney, Australia, pretty much all English-speaking countries. That all makes sense. That's not to say that you can't bot activity and have it come from these areas. You absolutely can, but I don't see any smoking gun, no red flags. I'm just seeing what looks pretty regular for an artist of his size on the monthly listeners. 11th most streamed city on Spotify, Sao Paulo again. The only difference that I find a little odd is that Sao Paulo was his #1 streaming city before the India takeover on YouTube. And on Spotify, it's not quite up there, but listener habits vary by country. So it could potentially make sense that this isn't a red flag for bot activity. It's just an inconsistency that we like to take note of for future comparison stuff, but everything else looks fine. And let's go ahead and take a look at Donnie T's Spotify monthly listeners. As of late, he's at 19.6 million, which would be a very respectable number if we didn't think that there was some fraudulent activity happening. This is a pretty substantial drops in monthly listener right here. We're losing hundreds of thousands of a day, and just before that we were seeing some boosts and everything. Then we have some drops, some boosts, It's pretty consistent between the different peaks right here. Plateaus were off by a couple 10,000 or so. And we've got a nice little peak there. That's a substantial amount. And prior to that, we were losing a lot for his monthly listeners here. And this is in the past 3 months. So between past 3 months, he's more or less stabled out and lost 1 million monthly listeners, 20.5 million versus about 19.6. Yeah, just under that 900,000 monthly listeners. If we zoom out and take another look at about the 6-month mark, we see a different trend happening here, don't we? We see a substantial decrease in monthly listeners. 6 months ago, our boy Donnie T had 27 million monthly listeners, and he has been losing a lot day over day, when frankly he should really be gaining a lot from all the different concerts and everything he's happening. Now there's one substantial peak that happens here, Sunday, August 28th, where we have a change of about 300,000 monthly listeners, which is substantial and unusual for the patterns that we're seeing in this 6-month period. I don't know if they're all fake. What I can tell you is that it's inconsistent with the rest of the data that we're seeing here. If we move backwards some here, we can see even larger changes in the monthly listeners in May, which is substantial. I mean, we're looking at the difference of a few million every day. And then start seeing a plateau and then an absolute drop. And this was about where we see everything coming down and the consistent loss of monthly listeners. So if we look at the data and observe this pattern right here, this is the reason why he's been losing monthly listeners ever since May, is because this is unsustainable. Either he had a release around this time, which it looks like it's almost dry. He had the Ye versus Pharrell thing. He had a concert as well. And he was part of the Broccoli City Festival. All right, so taking that into account, that could be the reason why he had such a large chain of monthly listeners, if you assume they're all organic. Maybe that song went viral on TikTok. They all got flooded into his Spotify. Either way, it was short-lived, and we've had a substantial decrease since then. Didn't retain a lot of those listeners because of the difference between before that peak, we're looking at about 19 million, and that's pretty much at what we're at now. So this peak right here is unsustainable. Now, if it was bot traffic, that would also make sense because of the severe dip in losing the monthly listeners, because it wasn't sustained. They didn't continue feeding the monthly listeners. If somebody was botting activity properly, they would make sure that certain things lined up, and they would be sure to bot activity on certain releases in certain timeframes and everything. That way it kind of buries in with the data, and it's a lot harder to tell. Taking a look at his Spotify followers here in the past 6 months, we're seeing what would look okay, but it's strangely consistent. I mean, almost to a T. You rarely see it this consistently. It's not supposed to be. The amount of followers you get will vary depending on what releases you have, concerts and everything. And down here, we have different events that it shows that he did, like which concerts he was at, So with that, you should see, different spikes, like significant spikes, or not as much. There's going to be days where you receive a lot more, and there's going to be days where you don't receive nearly as much, but we are seeing a consistent day over day growth, which looks really odd because there's very little variation. The variation's only in a couple hundred per day, and that looks suspicious to me. And that is also shown in this right here, where on Saturday, September 10th, there is a massive purge of followers. 30,000 followers got wiped. That is obviously Spotify doing its thing and purging the fake accounts, because it doesn't want that. Any of the fake accounts that were following him, purged. Now, important to know that whenever Spotify does purges, the purges are not 100%, meaning just because there was a purge doesn't mean they got all of the fake profiles. They just got the very obvious fake ones. So that means that there could be a lot more buried in here. We don't know, but it's a safe estimate that we do, because again, we're looking at consistent growth over here, just month over month, just the same amount. What I can tell you though is that there are fake followers in here because some were purged. That leaves us with a big red flag. Let's take a look at Instagram, currently one of the more popular social platforms until TikTok makes its full takeover. And we're seeing some really suspicious things. Now, look at this. In the past few days, he's gained no followers whatsoever, which is odd, let me tell you. You're at least losing some or gaining some, or, you know, if you got none, you got none. But an artist at this size, if we are to believe the narrative that he's an international artist and everything, you should be losing and gaining followers at some kind of rate. And then prior to that, we see a very consistent change in followers, like to a T, 2,090 followers a day for what looks like about a week, a couple days where he had none, and then we're back to a very consistent stair step. 2,283 followers gained consistently day over day. That is a sign of bot activity, my friends. That is a drip feed Instagram follower bot activity being run on his account. Now we got a couple days where it's 0, and again, here we are again, very consistent growth right here. The reason you do the drip feed is it's supposed to look a little bit more natural, but if you're not throwing a random variation into it and you have this like right here, this plateau, then it's an obvious red flag for fraudulent follower activity. So we know he's feeding the account bots, right? Through here, it's looking a little bit more normal, although I will say way more sporadic. And right here, looks like we had a bot purge of 1,393 accounts, unless he did something so egregious where he just lost 1,000 followers. But that's probably not the case. And here we go. We have consistent growth. Here we go. We have the consistent gain of followers. It's not really making sense with random sporadic drops. And if we go just a little bit further, we start seeing right over here, we start seeing the stair step again, the plateaus where he's constantly gaining. We know that to be fake followers right through there. All right, so we can see allegedly some bot activity gaining to the followers and everything, but let's run a real deal audit on it and find out with a relative degree of certainty how many of his followers are fake. So taking a look at Don Toliver's Instagram a little further, we're trying to start digging into the different metrics we have here. He's got 2.3 million followers, which is a fair amount. We all like to see that. But I want you to take a look at this right here, the engagement rate. The engagement rate is strangely high for a account of his size. What you're typically going to see for an engagement rate once a profile crosses the 1 million follower threshold is anywhere from 1 to 2%. That's on average if it's strictly organic. What we're seeing here is way too high of an engagement rate. What that tells me, it could be a lot of paid for artificial bot activity allegedly on his Instagram. If we look a little deeper, where this audit's telling us that about 16% of his following is fake on Instagram. That may be the case. I would dare say that it's actually higher than that. Couldn't give you a ballpark, but based on the graphs where we looked at, where he was consistently gaining those plateau of followers day over day, not a good look. By country, United States, that makes sense. Brazil, we see once again. Now, typically, if you're doing a bunch of fraudulent activity, botting and stuff of that nature, people don't tend to take this much attention to detail. So I actually think his Brazil following, that's like a sign that he's got some real organic stuff in there, because consistently through all the different platforms, we've seen Brazil and Sao Paulo Portuguese speakers kind of like pop up in all different graphs and data, which is a good sign. And after combing through all the data, I think we're ready to give our boy Donnie T a rating of certified cap. After everything we've seen on his YouTube, Spotify, and Instagram, it's hard not to give it anything but a cap rating, especially with how egregious the activity was on the new YouTube video and how little it's grown since the boost in views from India. We also know that he's currently botting Instagram followers, and an unknown portion of the Spotify followers are fake as well. However, I do want to stress this point. I'm not making the claim that all of his traffic is capped. He's definitely got a fan base buried somewhere in the data, but we saw too many red flags to give his following a fax rating, and we got to start calling the labels and artists out on their bullshit when we see it. There's nothing wrong with having a smaller fan base if they're all real. We're tired of everyone padding the stats for vanity's sake. If Don Toliver's new video is going to earn less than 1 million views in his first week, then so be it. If the music is good, then it doesn't matter if it only gets a few thousand views, so long as they're all from real fans. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for the next video in the series coming up soon. Shout out to the super producers from the All Cap family that are featured in the video, and make sure to finger blast that like and subscribe button on your way out. Catch you in the next one.